Greetings, everybody. This is Megan Raymond with WCET. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started since we have a lot of material to cover and we want to make sure to leave plenty of time for your questions. Today's webcast is What's New with SARA, which stands for the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement. You'll hear an update on the national agreement. My name is Megan Raymond. I'm the Manager of Events and Programs here at WCET. First, I'd like to thank Blackboard Collaborate for making this platform available. If you have any technical issues, you need to contact Blackboard directly, and I'll go ahead and enter that number in the chat box if you have any issues. Today, the presenters have mic privileges, and you are welcome to communicate with us via the chat box over on the left, so feel free to answer your questions, comments, or share resources, and we'll be moderating that as we go along. We'll get to questions toward the latter part of the webcast, but as your questions come up, please do enter them and then we'll be compiling them. I did post a link to the presentation materials. I'll go ahead and put that back here in the chat box in case you didn't get it. And we are recording this. Next week, at the latest by next Thursday, we'll have a YouTube video of the recording, the PowerPoint, and any resources that are shared. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Russ Poulin, who's the Interim Co-Executive Director and Deputy Director of Research Analysis here at WCET. Please welcome Russ.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. We have quite a crowd. I'd like to extend my thanks to Blackboard as well for providing this venue for us to have this conversation. I've been with WCET for 19 years now, and so I've been working on a variety of issues, one of which has been on this issue of state authorization and then the reciprocity around it, and I've been on several of the committees that have worked on this issue, and I'm so glad to see SARA come to fruition and moving that forward. And just want to remind everybody, when we talk about reciprocity, we're not talking about tuition reciprocity, and some of you in public institutions have been involved in that, so even though there's some of those agreements already, this is a new agreement that's required because of trying to focus on just the state authorization issue. And so with that, I'll move on just a little bit about WCET, that we are a membership organization that has members throughout the U.S. and quite a few in Canada as well. And we do work on a variety of educational technology and distance learning issues. We do have free webcasts for members, and sometimes when we get an issue like this that's very big, that we open it up to non-members as well, and that we have had more than 550 registrants for the day, and we actually had to cap it today, and so very glad to be able to host this for all of you. With that, our speakers today, we have Rhonda Epper, who joins us, who's the director of the WICHE version of SARA, the WICHE part of SARA, that she comes to us previously. She's with the Colorado Community Colleges working on academic issues and was co-director of CCC Online while she was there. We also have Marshall Hill, as the executive director of SARA and the NC SARA group. Previously, he's worked both at universities and at systems in both Texas and in Nebraska, and has both from the higher ed academic side and also from the regulator side. So he has had his feet in both worlds in the past, and he also, I served with him on the President's Forum Council State Government team that started the whole idea about SARA. Let's see, and then do want to say before turning it over to Marshall, would like to say again that if you do have questions, that we do ask that you enter them in the chat box at the left. We have 75 minutes for this session that we'll leave plenty of time at the end to try to get to those questions. For the most part, we'll leave questions to the end, but do put your questions as they come to you in there, and that some of them that we'll try to answer in the chat box, and some of them that we'll pose to Rhonda and Marshall when we get to the end. with that, I'm so pleased to turn this over to Marshall Hill, as the head of SARA, to lead us into the details.
Thank you very much, Russ.
Marshall, please go ahead.
First, thanks for inviting us to do this. It's always important and helpful to talk with people about SARA. People have lately said that I'm the Johnny Appleseed of SARA. I've been called much worse many times. Before talking about SARA, I want to give a thanks to the Lumina Foundation, which has been supportive of this work from the very beginning, helped support the efforts of the President's Forum CSG drafting team, and then have now provided ongoing funding to initiate SARA, both for our national work and our regional work. So let's go on to the next slide. I guess I can do that as well, can't I? So what is our problem? I think the vast majority of you on the webinar today understand this, but I want to go through this fairly quickly. Unlike most countries in the world, the United States assigns to states the responsibilities to deal with and regulate education, higher education as well. Most other countries have a centralized Ministry of Higher Education that makes policies and procedures uniform throughout the country. We don't have that. Some people say that the strength of our system is that we don't have one. Disagreements about that, but it's true. States and territories regulate higher education within their borders. And on this issue of how they deal with out-of-state institutions that want to do things within the state, they vary an enormous amount. Despite all of that, the cross-state offering of online education by colleges and universities is expanding dramatically. We don't have any real good numbers on that, but I think everyone involved believes that it is, and the initial data collection on that through the iPad system is going to become better as we go along, and we'll have a better picture of that. Right now, excuse me, right now, at present, there is no alternative to each institution that wants to offer courses and programs online to students in other states to have those institutions determine what they need to do in order to be in compliance with those other states' laws and rules. There is no other way to do it right now other than contacting individual states and territories or learning through other sources what those requirements are and have your institution do what's necessary in order to be in compliance. So consequently, we have thousands of institutions that offer online courses and programs to students in other states, contacting and working through and trying to deal with 54 states and territories, and sometimes with multiple regulatory agencies in those states. So that's obviously inefficient. It's costly for the institutions, and many of us believe it's really not effective in supporting access to high-quality distance education throughout the country. We started this work because we all believe that online education is a useful and necessary tool in helping our country increase its educational attainment. I'm in my mid-60s. In my lifetime, I've always known that people my age group comprise the best educated population in the world. That's no longer the case for people who are 18 to 34-year-olds, for example, in our country. People of that age are 15th or 16th in terms of their educational attainment around the country. Online education is going to be a useful tool in helping improve that situation, and therefore anything we can do to take the hurdles out of the way of quality higher delivery of post-secondary distance ed through online and other sources is useful and helpful. So next. So our goals are, with SARA, to establish a state-level reciprocity process that will help deal with all of this. We want something that's more efficient, that's more effective, and that's uniform, and that has reasonable standards of practice. We need to be able to not only make it easier for good to be done, but we need to be able to deal with quality or integrity issues that have from time to time arisen with online education. We need something that's less costly for states and institutions, and therefore the students that they serve. So next. Next slide, please. So what we have developed is a nationwide system of reciprocity that's going to be administered by the 4 existing regional compacts. Let's take a little bit of time on this. First, reciprocity. What reciprocity means is that one state is going to agree to accept some common ways of doing things and common standards. The best example that we have, analogy, is driver's licenses. All states have agreed to accept other states' driver's licenses. So I suspect every one of us on the call today has a driver's license, but we only have one for the state in which we live. But we can drive in other states without having to get a separate driver's license for those states. We have to abide by the laws of those states, but every state has agreed to accept another state's ways of testing and evaluating whether or not someone should have a driver's license. Second point, regional compacts. These are not the regional accrediting bodies like NEASC or WASC or SACS or middle states. These are regional education compacts that have existed for a long time. SARA is the oldest of the 4. It's 65 years old, I believe. WICHE, Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, is 60 years old this year. Midwestern Higher Education Compact, a bit younger, and NEBI, a bit younger. But these are existing regional compacts that do a number of things to help promote the improvement of educational attainment within their regions, to help support cost-saving initiatives, to provide opportunities for students in one state to study in another, and so forth. SARA is unique among the 4 in that it also deals a lot with K-12 issues. But the 4 existing regional compacts are implementing the SARA agreement. A couple of things about this map. You'll notice that there are 2 states in the Midwest, North and South Dakota, that have crosshatches. That means both of those states belong to both WICHE and to the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. They can choose to do their SARA work through one or the other of those 2 regional compacts. And my understanding is that South Dakota has chosen to do its SARA work through WICHE, and North Dakota is choosing to do its SARA work through the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. There are 3 states in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, that you see are colored gray. That means they are not a part of any regional compact for whatever reasons they have had. They now have a choice. They can continue to not be involved in this regional compact arena and not be involved in SARA, in which case institutions in those states will not be able to participate in SARA, but will need to go through the existing process of getting the approval or whatever is necessary, authorization or exemption, in all other states in which they enroll students. That's their first choice. I don't believe they will do that. Their second choice is to fully affiliate with one of the regional compacts and become a full member of a regional compact, pay full state dues, and so forth. If they do that, they can then partake of all the programs offered by the relevant regional compact. The third choice, the one which I believe the 3 are going to follow, at least initially, are to choose to affiliate with a regional compact in order to participate in SARA. The regional compacts have agreed to make that opportunity available to those 3 states for a fee of $50,000 per year, which is significantly less than the fees that states pay to join the regional compacts. I believe MEC's fees are the lowest of the four. The agency I formerly worked at in Nebraska paid $95,000 a year for Nebraska to be a member of the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. So the fees for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York to become involved in SARA work through a regional compact are significantly lower than that. I believe, well, I can report that there are serious discussions in all three of those states working toward affiliation with a regional compact to participate in SARA. That's a surprise to some of us that were early on involved in this work. We would have said it'll be a long time before New York would take that approach. But senior leadership in every higher education sector in New York has petitioned the state to find a way for New York to participate in SARA. There are meetings at the end of this month in Pennsylvania to pursue that issue as well, and ongoing discussions with New Jersey. So SARA will be implemented by the regional compacts who are working together with common standards, uniform procedures and approaches in order to have a nationwide agreement. So that an institution, let's say in Texas, that would, if Texas joins SARA and institutions in Texas join SARA, then they would be able to have the benefits of dealing with SARA provisions in any other state across the country that also joins SARA. Okay, let's go to the next slide. If we were able to move from 54 ways of doing this work down to 4, that would be progress, but frankly it's not what we really need. We need to have a nationwide solution to this problem. And to help ensure that that is the case, there is a National Council for SARA. The main purpose of that is to ensure that we do indeed have a nationwide system rather than 4 different regional systems. There are 21 members of the National Council. Each of the 4 regional compact presidents is a member. We have the president of SACS. We have a representative of NEASC. We have regulators. We have representatives of state government. From SHEO, the State Higher Education Executive Officers. There's representative from every single sector of higher education, public, independent nonprofit, independent for-profit, and so forth. The first meeting of that group was November 1st this past year. We considered bylaws. We did not yet approve bylaws. I would have been amazed if we had done that at our first meeting. Provided a financial overview for SARA. We established fees for institutional participation in SARA. Many of you have probably already seen these, but let me go through them. They will be $2,000 a year for institutions with fewer than 2,500 FTE students, $4,000 for mid-sized institutions, and $6,000 for above, 10,000 and above. I'm often asked, why didn't you set this on the number of online students an institution has? The main answer is there's no verifiable, reliable data on that. And second, to carry that out a little bit, SARA is really about the delivery of distance education across state lines. So you'd also need to find a way to break down an institution's online students to in-state and out-of-state in order to be completely rational about this. If in the future there is a way to really verify all that, we'll consider switching to that. But right now, these are your institution's FTE students as you report to the federal IPEDS system, Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. The most important thing that the NC-SARA group did at its first meeting was to review and endorse the regional SARA documents. Each of the 4 regional compacts has had its governing entity approve a SARA document. We've been referring to them as WSARA for the WICHE document, MSARA for MEC, NSARA and SSARA, and so forth. It's been confusing to people in the field. Why do we have 4 documents? Why don't we just have one that all 4 compacts have adopted? Well, that would have frankly been clearer, but that's not the way the initiative evolved. And I'll say a little bit more about that. What we did have the National Council do is review all 4 documents. I contracted with an external expert to provide that review. We then have modifications made by all 4 to ensure that on the points that really matter, standards, practices, requirements of institutions, requirements of states, etc., that all 4 said the same things. They vary in ways that don't matter so much. 3 of the documents, WICHE, MEC, and SRAB, provide some narrative information. The reason why this is necessary, the history of the regional compact, so forth and so on. NEBI's document is pretty much stripped of all of that and has mainly functional details. But we had the National Council review and certify that those 4 documents are functionally uniform. That is, the things that matter to states and matter to institutions in terms of expectations, standards, requirements, processes, so forth, are the same in all 4. Okay, that's very important. Next. Next slide, if we could. Here we go. So what is all this about? First, and I stress this over and over, this is a voluntary initiative. It is voluntary for states and voluntary for institutions within states. This is not a federal initiative. It's not an idea of the U.S. Department of Education. It's not foisted upon us by anybody else. This is a voluntary initiative arrived at by cooperation with states, institutions, and so forth. It acknowledges the traditional roles within higher education's way of accountability in the United States. There's a role for the federal government that they already carry out, no new role for them. There are roles for states and accrediting bodies that are recognized by the U.S. Department of Ed. So it builds on our current system. It lays out a framework for state-level reciprocity. This is an agreement between states, not an agreement between institutions. States authorize institutions. Sometimes the federal government does as well. But this is an agreement between states. We've got a governance structure, implementation by the regional compacts, a national council to ensure national coverage, and we've got a financial plan. So the way it will work is that states will choose, if they choose, to join SARA through a regional compact, either as a full member or affiliating for the sole purpose of SARA. States will then invite their eligible institutions to participate and approve them for participation based upon the same requirements in every state across the country, so that if 2 states choose to join, the expectations and requirements they have of institutions within their states to participate will be the same. So if you are in one state, you should not worry whether or not your state will make it hard on you to join, and the state which contains your competitors will make it easy for them to join. This will be uniform across the country. SARA states will agree that they will impose no additional non-SARA requirements on institutions from other SARA states. You'll hear a little bit more about that as we proceed. Next slide. Next slide. Here we go. So who can participate? Degree-granting post-secondary institutions can participate. That is, if your institution offers an associate degree or above, you can participate. It's open to institutions in all sectors, public colleges and universities, and independent institutions, both nonprofit and for-profit. SARA has collapsed the nation's total variance in the rules which were the triggers that states use to determine that they regulate your activities to a uniform set. SARA states agree to accept those uniform triggers of physical presence as being triggers that will be abided by SARA institutions. A state can continue and will need to continue to have whatever rules, whatever statutes it now has to deal with this work in place for dealing with non-SARA institutions. If your institution wants to open up a branch campus or rent space and teach students or have an administrative office in another state, that other state will still retain the ability to approve or disapprove that action by you. It shifts principal oversight to a home state approach. Regulators now spend most of their time looking at what is imported into their state. To some extent, SARA will flip that around, and someone in a state will be responsible for dealing with any concerns, complaints, and so forth caused by or resulting from the actions of their home state institutions. We'll talk about that more as we proceed. Once again, thanks to Lumina Foundation for funding this. Next. Well, at this point, I'm going to ask Rhonda to take over, and she's going to talk a bit more now about the SARA process, what's required of institutions, how this is going to work, and so forth. So, Rhonda.
Thank you, Marshall, and good afternoon, everyone. I am representing the WICHE Regional Compact for SARA, but the processes that I'm going to be covering in this part of the presentation are really the same for all of the regions. So if we begin by looking at the SARA process at a very broad level, and I'm going to kind of reinforce a point that Marshall just made. But let's say that I'm an institution, which, by the way, I came from an institution. As Russ mentioned, I spent the last 12 years with the Colorado Community College system. So I tend to view this process through that lens. But the fundamental change for institutions is that if you decide to join SARA, you will be seeking approval from your home state SARA portal agency and not from other SARA member states. Okay? So let me now put on a regulator's hat. And if I am a state regulator in a SARA state, I'm going to be switching from regulating imports. And I'm going to trust that the imports of online education that are coming from SARA states are being regulated elsewhere. And I'm going to worry about what is being exported from my own state. So my kind of view of the world from a regulator's perspective is changing from focusing on imports to focusing on exports. So the institutions, I think Marshall mentioned this also, will pay one fee per year to NC SARA, except for states that are not yet SARA member states. So until such time as a state joins SARA, your institution will have to continue going through the authorization process that you do now to operate in non-SARA states. We'll have consistent criteria for data collection, consistent definitions for physical presence, and a clear path for complaint resolution. So what are the requirements for state membership? And as Marshall also mentioned, the state must join SARA before any of its institutions are able to participate. So first of all, the state must be a member of one of the 4 interstate higher education regional compacts that administer SARA or affiliate with one of those compacts for purposes of SARA. The state must have the legal authority under state law to enter an interstate agreement on behalf of the state. I will just say that most states are going to need statutory change in order to enter into reciprocity for this purpose. Many states already have passed legislation to allow them to enter into reciprocity for SARA purposes. Many states will also have to exempt institutions that are operating under SARA from existing state laws that govern physical presence, if any such laws exist in the state. The next 3 points I'm going to skip for now because those are also covered under institutional membership requirements. So just moving on, the state must have a clearly articulated and comprehensive state process for consumer protection in regard to SARA activities, and it must cover all sectors. So public institutions, private institutions, not-for-profit, and for-profit institutions. The state will designate a portal agency to coordinate SARA matters and serve as the principal point of contact. It will not impose any requirements, standards, or fees on an institution that's from another state operating under SARA, except for those that are set forth under SARA. The state will require institutions to abide by the interregional guidelines for the evaluation of distance education. These are known as the CREC guidelines. And if you've been around distance education for a while, you'll remember that these were developed and propagated by WCET many years ago, probably close to 20 years ago. They were originally called the Principles of Good Practice for Electronically Delivered Degree Programs. They've been updated numerous times over the years, and they've been adopted and endorsed by all of the regional accrediting bodies. So the states will also agree to document all formal complaints received under SARA, what actions were taken and resolutions, and they also need to have clear policies for addressing catastrophic events. Okay, so the state application process itself is quite simple once those basic elements are covered. You can find the application materials to join SARA on your Regional Compact's website, and we'll put those websites up at the end of the presentation. But the state will submit to its regional SARA office a copy of the statutory or other legal authority to enter into reciprocity, a copy of the complaint and investigation and resolution process to handle complaints for all institutions, accredited degree granting institutions. And just to keep in mind that the complaint process that your state develops for SARA purposes only covers institutional activity under SARA. We had a fair amount of confusion about this, so let me just try and explain that a little bit. The kinds of complaints that would arise under SARA are complaints that would be coming from an out-of-state student taking courses from one of your home state providers. So if I'm the state of Colorado, I might get a complaint from a student from Nebraska who is taking courses from, say, Jones International University based in Denver, or Arapahoe Community College. It does not cover students from Colorado who would be taking online courses from Jones International or Arapahoe Community College. Although there's a separate federal requirement that states have a complaint process for all students, that's kind of beyond the scope of our focus today. So if you have questions about that, we can address them at the end of the presentation. The state will designate who the portal agency will be for SARA and provide a signature of the individual with the authority to commit the state to SARA. Our process for WSARA is that once we receive a state application, we'll complete a staff review and we'll present it to our steering committee, the WSARA steering committee, for their approval, and then it will go to the WICHE commissioners for their final approval. And the WICHE commissioners meet twice a year in May and November. So for institutional participation, we have a set of requirements. The first one is that your principal campus or central administrative unit of the degree granting institution must be domiciled in a state that has joined SARA. And we had a lot of questions about this, so I'm going to expand just a little bit. If I'm a multi-campus online institution that has locations in several states, to which SARA do I belong? Well, the anchor of accountability for SARA is tied to the degree granting authority. So it's not the corporate office, but it's where your accredited degree granting institution is located. And we can provide some examples if you have questions about that. You must be a U.S. degree granting institution accredited by a federally recognized accrediting body. For non-public institutions, you must have a financial responsibility index score of 1.5 or above. There is a provision for states to conditionally accept institutions who have a score between 1.0 and 1.5 if the state has reason to believe that institution is financially sound. The institution must agree to abide by the CRAC guidelines. And just a reminder, if you are regionally accredited, this is already an expectation of your accreditor, but the CRAC guidelines are actually included on the institutional application. Just as a reminder that these are expectations that SARA has for quality online instruction that any institution operating under the SARA agreement will abide by, regardless of whether you have regional or national accreditation. The institution must agree to be responsible for actions of any third-party providers. So if you've hired a third-party company, one of the bundled service providers, for example, to help your institution establish or grow your online programs, it's still you, your institution, as a degree-granting institution, is responsible for their actions under SARA. Similar for consortial arrangements, under SARA, the degree-granting institution is ultimately responsible for whatever your consortial delivery entity does on your behalf. And then to notify the state SARA entity of any negative changes to your accreditation status. The institution must provide the data necessary to monitor SARA activities, and Marshall is going to talk a little bit more about how that process is evolving. We work with your state SARA entity to resolve any complaints arising from students from other SARA states. To notify in writing all students enrolled in a course or program that leads to professional licensure, whether or not that course or program meets the requirements for licensure in the state where the student resides. If you are unable to determine whether or not your program will allow that student to sit for a licensure exam, you have to let the student know that you've been able to determine that. Also pay any state fees assessed by your home state for administering SARA. Not all states will charge a fee for this, but we know of a couple that are looking at doing that or have decided to do that, especially if the state has to hire new staff to perform SARA duties. So the institutional application process, again, what we have outlined is a pretty simple process, but it will be up to your state SARA entity to set up a process that works for your state. But the institution will apply through the state SARA portal agency. There's a SARA institutional application. You'll have a signature from your CEO or chief academic officer that certifies that your institution meets all the requirements. And then you'll pay the annual fee to NC SARA. Okay, we have a few updates to share with you regarding current state interest and participation in SARA. Even though SARA has been in the works for several years, keep in mind that we only actually opened our doors for business as of January 1st of this year. But there's a lot of activity out there, and we do have a sense of what we're expecting in the next several months and into 2015. I'm going to speak for WSARA only, and then I'll turn it back over to Marshall. But for WSARA, it looks like the states of Alaska, Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington will likely apply by April 15th of this year, which is our deadline for the WICHE commissioners to be able to approve those states at their May 12th meeting. Any state that comes in after that April 15th deadline, but before October 15th, will be considered at the November WICHE commissioners meeting. So we're expecting several others to be in that group, that second group as well. We're looking at between 8 and 10 WICHE states to join in 2014. Some of other states in the Western region that have introduced legislation or have drafted legislation include Arizona, South Dakota, New Mexico, and California. North Dakota, as Marshall mentioned, is a WICHE state, but it looks like they're going to be applying through the Midwestern region. South Dakota will be applying through the WICHE region. We encourage them to choose one or the other, and it doesn't really matter as long as they join SARA. That is what is important. Finally, I just have a request. If you are representing an institution in a Western state, or actually in any state, I would ask you to contact or have your leadership contact your state's CHEO agency or higher education board. If you don't know who that is or who's kind of leading up the SARA efforts, please contact me and I will tell you who is leading the discussions about SARA in your state. If you're from another region, we're going to be putting up a slide that will have the other regional SARA directors' names and contact information. But it's important that, especially in states where there is legislation on the table, that leaders in your state know that there is institutional support for SARA participation.
Rhonda?
So I am going to turn it back to Marshall
Rhonda, before you do that,
on what's happening in the rest of the country.
Rhonda? We had a request to repeat those states that you just mentioned for that have already applied and you're going to consider.
Well, no state has applied in the WICHE region yet. So let me just repeat what I said. The states that we're expecting to apply by April 15th include Alaska, Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington.
And that's just the WICHE region, right?
The states that are working, that's just the WICHE region, yes. Marshall can update the other regions. Arizona, South Dakota, New Mexico, and California have either drafted or currently drafting or have introduced legislation. The timing of these states matters. If legislation is going through this year, in some states it wouldn't be effective until 2015. Many of these other states that are coming on early this year already have made statutory changes, so that makes their membership early on possible. Some of the states have longer rulemaking processes that will delay their ability to apply. So I think Marshall has some overall estimates, but there will be a large group of states coming in during 2014 and then another large group coming in during 2015. Does that answer the question?
I think so, yes, thanks.
Okay, when I've been asked the question of how many states are going to join SARA and by when, I've been saying the following. I believe that by the fall of 2014, we will have between 20 and 25 states that will have joined SARA. And by the fall of 2015, I believe, I expect that we'll have between 40 and 45 states that will have joined SARA. It's obvious that the early adopting states will be mostly in the WICHE and Midwestern regions. So let me tell you a little bit about Midwestern situation. According to our colleague Jenny Parks, who's the SARA Director for the Midwestern region. The following states are planning to move forward in 2014. Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, which has already submitted its application to MEC, becoming the first state in the nation to do that. Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Ohio. I'll repeat those quickly again. Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Ohio. Ones that are working on legislation to introduce in 2015 or introduce in 2014 with an application to become a SARA state in 2015 are Michigan and Wisconsin. SREB has a different situation than the rest of the country, mainly because they have had a reciprocity system of their own for quite a long time called SARA. So they have to let go of something before grabbing hold of something else. SARA, which is a reciprocity agreement for institutions in SREB states, only is open to regionally accredited nonprofit institutions. SARA is broader than that. SREB will be phasing out SARA, their current process, as soon as the majority of SREB states have joined SARA. And I think it's going to take a bit longer in the South. There have been a lot of discussions with the states. SREB held a regional forum this past Monday and Tuesday. There were 99 people attending that, representatives from, I think, every SREB state. A lot of discussion in many of those states. That a number of SREB states have biennial meetings of their legislatures, so they'll be slowed down by having to introduce legislation and not being able to do it until January of 2015. I think the states that I would put at somewhere near the top of the list, or potentially early adopting states in the South, would be North Carolina and Tennessee. In the Northeast, they've taken a different approach. There are only 6 member states in NEBI. They haven't had a regional forum. I think the early adopting states there in the Northeast, by the information I have, will be Maine and Vermont. There is a lot of discussion in each of the others, and it's a question of getting some interstate or inside the state issues resolved before moving forward. I believe that by the fall of this year we will have member states in every one of the regions. Okay? There are 3 areas that we need to do some more policy work around, and that is data. What will be the data requirements of participating institutions? I'm putting together an advisory committee to help work on that. I can tell you in generalities right now, I don't think it will be in any way onerous on institutions. If there is information you already provide to somebody else, we'll get information from those sources. We will publicize and make available all the data that we do collect. We'll continually evaluate whether we're collecting the right amount and the right things. We need to be able to show that we're making a difference and making some progress. And so there will be some data requirements of institutions. Those are not yet articulated. I personally don't believe that any institution offering online courses and programs will be stressed in any way to provide the data that we're going to ask them to provide. We're working further on the current consumer protection sections of our policies and standards document. Draft out for consideration of that modifies what's currently there. What's currently there allows the possibility of a student who is displeased with an institution's resolution of his or her complaint to appeal that complaint to the state SARA portal entity, and then it's still dissatisfied, to the regional compact, and then it's still dissatisfied satisfied theoretically to the National Council. The draft out for consideration and comment changes that to have student complaints stop at the SARA portal agency for the home state. So if someone were to complain about the offering of any institution, that student's complaint would be resolved within that institution's home state. We're going to work that through the process. I think we will get that modification dealt with within the next month or so. We are needing to develop some more detailed language about what needs to be in place in order to deal with a catastrophic event. By catastrophic events, we really mean institutional closures. Most states have laws about what happens when a for-profit institution closes, what kind of recompense needs to be made to its students and so forth. Frankly, the federal government has requirements on those points, as do accrediting bodies. We need to do some more work about that because most of them are silent about what happens to students that are students of that institution but reside in another state. SARA needs to cover that. So going forward, we're going to have a second meeting of the National Council sometime this spring, probably in early May. Still working on scheduling for that. We have FAQs that are continually being revised based on the questions that we get from people, and we post those on our website. And I think now's the time to move to the next slide, which tells you where our website is located. It's www.nc-sara.org. I strongly encourage you to look there. You will find foundational documents, you will find FAQs, you will find the policies and standards documents, you will find links to all 4 regional compacts and their team, and ways to find out answers to many of your questions. There's contact information for me, for Alan Contreras, who is working with us, and then contact information for people working in the 4 regional compacts. Let's see, next. I think that's, here is the list of contact information for the key people in the 4 regional compacts and for me in my office. We are all willing to help with all kinds of questions you might have, and I encourage you to contact us. Russ, I think that about finishes us
Let's
up.
see. Well, we've got quite a few questions. Let me start with this first one. I'm going to start sort of from the bigger point of view and work down through the state, first about agreements and then about the states and then down to fees and institutions. And the first one was, the question was, why are there 5 regional compacts and not 1 national compact? And I think they meant agreements. And could you talk a little bit about that, about why there's 5 agreements?
Yeah, I'll respond to that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there are 4 agreements. There are 4 regional documents. 1 for NEBI, 1 for SREB, 1 for MEC, and 1 for WICHE. The reason there are 4 is because the 4 regional compacts started this work on this initiative at different times. And there are 4 autonomous organizations that wanted to work through an advisory structure within their regions. So each of those regional compacts has a SARA advisory committee which helped do this work. Would it have been cleaner had there been 1 document which all 4 worked through and then eventually approved? Yes, but the fact is that's just not the way it happened. So the question then becomes, are they different in ways that matter? And I outlined earlier the steps we've taken to ensure that they're not.
Great. Let me move to the next question. This has to do with talking about states. It's talking about the 3 states, New Jersey, New York, but I guess this could be true of any state. So if let's say that if those states or any other state do not join, does that mean that each institution would need to seek individual approval in that state if any state does not join SARA?
Yes, that is the case. So for a long time into the future, I think, or maybe not so long, we hope, institutions will have two tracks to go down, and states will have as well. If your state does not join SARA, then you are obligated, your institution is obligated to do whatever it needs to do in order to become compliant with the laws, rules, and regulations of every state in which you enroll online students. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid through SARA. But if your state does not join, the SARA option will not be available to you.
If I could just respond to that as well, from a state regulator perspective, they will likely always have to have two approval tracks, one for those institutions that are from a SARA member state, and one for institutions who are from a state that may or may not have joined SARA. They may be from a SARA state, but the institution may have chosen not to participate in SARA. So the states will have to have that dual authorization and approval track, regardless of whether or not the institution is from a SARA state.
Okay, and I think we need to reiterate, we did have a few questions about that. For an institution to join, that its state must join first. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that was helpful. That was good. And then there's a question about what is SARA doing in terms of helping the states to join, in terms of informing them, helping them with needed legislation and whatever work that's needed.
Why don't we let Rhonda start with that?
Sure. So in our office, in the WSARA office, we held a regional forum on December 10th of last year. We invited all of the WICHE states to attend. The other regions, except for NEVI, have held similar forums. All of our states came to that forum with a team of individuals representing institutions, representing state regulators, representing all sectors of higher education, the SHEO office, and so on. And we provided time for the state teams to have breakout sessions where they talked about the next steps that would need to be taken to join SARA. We're providing technical assistance as requested. We've been out visiting the states. I've been out to Colorado, of course, it's close by, Oregon, as well as Washington State, Arizona, looking at going to Alaska in a couple of weeks to present at a Board of Regents meeting. So your regional compact director is there to assist you. We will come and talk to groups. We'll facilitate discussions if needed or provide any information that can be helpful.
Let me add just a little bit to that. We have information on our website that can be helpful in that regard. There is some legislation, examples of legislation that other states have adopted. Sometimes that's helpful. I caution any state to think that it can adopt any other state's language without modification, because all of this is very, very local. So the Nebraska language, for example, is really quite simple because the Nebraska structures were quite simple. What worked for us won't work for other states. I'm making available to other regional compacts the services of Alan Contreras in our office. He's not able to provide legal advice. He is an attorney but not a member of the bar. And also, within the next couple of weeks, we are going to be releasing a helpful document to assist states in thinking through the things they need to think about in determining whether or not they have gotten all their I's dotted and their T's crossed in their own state laws about joining SARA. We'll be making that available as soon as I've vetted it through the other 4 regional compacts, and I expect that to happen within 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, and then we have had some questions about your being able to respond to some of the questions that we have here in something in a follow-up document that we can do that, and we had said earlier on that we would do that, and you'd be willing to do that, Marshall? And
sure.
Okay.
Sure. Glad to.
And then there was a question about updates, and it just people were interested in seeing those list of states written out again that you had mentioned earlier about where you think they are. But on the website, you are planning to provide some sort of update in terms of where states are in the process. Is that correct? And when would we see that?
Yes, we are. And if participants on this webinar or others will go to our website, you'll see a place to sign up for newsletters, to register for those that we'll send out via email. And also, as soon as states start to join, we will put a map of the United States, and there will be a designation for those states that have joined. Joining means that they have been approved to join by their regional compact. That will then turn into a sort of a drill down tool, where, let's say, Indiana is likely to be the first state to be approved to participate in SARA, and therefore Indiana institutions are likely going to be the first SARA institutions. So fairly soon you'll be able to click on Indiana on our map and then roll down and see a list of SARA approved institutions within Indiana, and that'll happen for every state.
There's a question about how they could find out about who is working on this issue in each state, and what advice would you give to an institution to follow up on that?
I think the person to contact is check with the regional compact director. They can tell you who in your state you can talk with to ask questions or offer support and so forth. They are closely connected with people in every state who are working on movement towards SARA.
Okay, and I put that slide back up there so that people can see those names, and so they'll be included in the slides. There also were several questions about physical presence, several variations on that. So in regards to recruiting or doing face-to-face activities, and can you say a little bit about so a state and an institution sign up for SARA? What can they do under physical presence? What can they not do?
Well, Russ, as you know, we could spend another hour talking about that. I refer people most helpfully, I think, to the Policies and Standards document that is on our website. It distills all of that into the current language. The basic concept is that if your institution becomes a SARA institution, the physical presence requirements that are part of SARA are what you deal with in other SARA states. For non-SARA states, you have to deal with whatever the physical presence requirements or triggers are in those states. The aspects of physical presence which are really the dark and bloody ground of our discussion are those things dealing with clinical placements, rotations, and so forth. I don't want to address those off the cuff. I refer you to the physical presence documents and to the FAQs. So the physical presence, SARA physical presence provisions are within the Policies and Standards document, and they're also addressed within the FAQs. And look there, and if you have further questions, contact me or the person or the Regional Compact Director, SARA Director that you've seen to contact, or Alan Contreras in our office. And we'll do our best to help you through that. Maybe one last comment. None of us believe that we have this perfect. First, we don't believe there is a perfect to begin with, and we haven't got it. There will be modifications as we move forward. My analogy is the Constitution of the United States. We developed a Constitution, states could ratify it or not, and then subsequent to that there were modifications. That will undoubtedly be the case with SARA. But we have to move forward at some point. If we were to wait till every single question about every arcane point were answered, we would never get this done. So I encourage your listeners to think about the rationality behind it, the sort of the intent behind it, and then continue to ask questions. And the questions we've been getting are all good ones, and they help refine and help us make all this better. But we don't have all the answers. And yes, we are making this up as we go along. But a lot of good people have put a lot of time and thought and effort into it, and we'll continue to do that.
I think on physical presence, well, I agree that we should get people to go look at that. I think, my opinion is, I think that they'll be pleasantly not surprised, but they'll like what they see in terms of the different types of activities that they'll be able to do in a state, that a lot of the things that they're currently prohibited from doing that they'll be allowed to do under SARA is what I'm seeing there. So
I think so too.
If I could just comment on that from an institutional perspective, and my experience in working through seeking authorizations is that these definitions of physical presence, in fact, do make it much easier for institutions to operate without the kind of barriers that were really difficult for delivering. If you're just delivering an online program, things like advertising won't trigger presence. Maintaining a server or a router or some other similar electronic device won't trigger presence. Having a faculty member or an adjunct faculty member located in another state won't trigger physical presence, or holding proctored exams. Things like that really make sense are the things, as Russ mentioned, that you'll find really appealing about the physical presence definitions.
Yeah, good point.
And then we've had several questions about will the institutions be able to, or will the states be able to impose other sorts of requirements on the institutions. For example, that there are some states that approve program by program rather than by institution. Will a institution still have to get those program approvals, or are there other things that they can impose on institutions?
No. The answer is no. If a state joins SARA, it agrees to treat SARA institutions in other SARA states by the provisions of SARA and not add any others or require any others to that. And frankly, that's part of the discussion. Some states have concerns that SARA is not tough enough. It does not require enough oversight of those out-of-state institutions. In practice, I think we all know that institutions want the clearest, cleanest playing field ahead of themselves that they can get, but they also want to be sure that they're not taken advantage of by out-of-state institutions. And finding the right balance between those concerns has taken an enormous amount of time and effort. But if you're a SARA institution in a SARA state and enroll students in another SARA state, that other state has agreed not to impose any other kinds of program review requirements or bond postings or whatever that are not contained within the SARA provisions.
Okay, and one thing that we haven't hit on is licensure issues. Would you say a bit about licensure and how that works? So things like nursing or
nursing and teacher education and
teacher
psychology.
Education, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Those of us who've been working on this for quite a while were encouraged by some people to try to solve that issue along with this. And we gave that a lot of thought and consideration and decided that, in our phrase, it was a bridge too far. It was just too much to try to tackle all at once. What we're referring to is the issue that, let's say your institution offers a nursing program via distance education in another state, you of course not only have to get the approval of your institution to operate in that other state, but you have to get the approval of that state's Board of Nursing Examiners in order to enable students who complete your program to be able to sit for licensure. It of course does a student in another state no good to go through a program and then find out that they can't become licensed as a nurse or a psychologist or a K-12 teacher. So we don't solve that problem. What we have done, though, is provide an example of how this work can be done. And Russ and I have participated in, I believe, 3 calls now with the National Association of State Boards of Nursing Examiners. And they are very interested in the SARA process. They are working up their own approach to interstate reciprocity. They have designed a document that looks very much like SARA. And so I'm hopeful that these issues will be solved. I think the nurses will do it first, perhaps followed by the psychology profession, and then maybe by education. Right now, what SARA will require is something better than what we now have, an institution that offers an online program that leads to licensure. As we mentioned earlier, will be required to tell prospective students one of 2 things. Either they say, our program will qualify you to sit for licensure as a nurse in your state. That would be the best outcome. Or they will say, at this point we are unable to determine whether your completion of our program will allow you to sit for licensure as a nurse in your home state. Here is the contact information for the people who can confirm that whether or not that will be satisfactory. Frankly, that's better than what we have now, and it should help.
Great, and I'll take the moderator's prerogative here to answer a couple things, and you can comment on. We're going to run perhaps just a slight bit over, and that is we had one question about what's going on about the negotiated rulemaking, and several questions about are we all on hold, and we just should stop doing anything with state authorization. I'm going to run those 2 things together and give my opinion on it. The negotiated rulemaking is the next step that the Department of Education and the federal government needs to take in order to bring back the federal regulation regarding state authorization. As you may know, the federal distance education regulation has been set aside. They can't enforce it. There is no July 1st, 2014 deadline, as some of you may think there is. There is no deadline. There is no federal regulation right now. But all of the states are still enforcing their laws because those laws have been around for decades. So there is no federal regulation. However, the Department of Ed is moving forward, and if they keep on this track, they could make a new deadline as soon as July 1st of 2015. They could request that institutions be in compliance by as soon as July 1st of 2015. I don't know if that's the date they're going to pick, but they're certainly going on that track that they could do that. So that gets to my second thing about should we put all state authorization on hold? And I would say no. And the reasons I would say that is that the federal regulation is coming back. You want to make sure that you're in compliance. If you're not working with the state and not in queue, and they decide not to join SARA, you could end up being way at the back of the line and could be very sad July 1st, 2015, if that's the date that they pick. The other thing, you don't know if your state's going to join. You don't know what other states are going to join. And so you need to continue to move forward on working on state authorization. Now, like you always have, you can prioritize that, but I still think that your institution would be unwise to put everything on hold. And let me just see if Rhonda or Marshall have any comments on that.
I think that's very good advice and completely accurate. I'm quite certain that the federal government is going to bring back the state authorization requirement in this next round of negotiated rulemaking. My guess is they'll they'll put it in just exactly as they've had it at this point. I am going to be suggesting to them that they incorporate in their language specific statements blessing state authorization as a means that reciprocity as a means that institutions can use to demonstrate compliance with authorization requirements. I was on the negotiated rulemaking panel that initially put out this provision. They were willing to do that at that time, but frankly nobody else on the panel, or very few, were even interested in it. I think the climate has changed. I'm very often asked if I think the federal government is going to jerk the rug out from under SARA, and I just don't think there's any possibility really of that. I would be amazed if that's happened. There's been very, very good expressions of support from senior leadership at the Department of Education for SARA. They've been very supportive to the extent that they can. This is not a federal program, but they, I believe, are quite pleased with the way it's developing.
And I would just add to that I know there are a lot of institutions out there that are sitting back and just kind of waiting for the reciprocity agreement to happen and are under the impression that that will solve everything. And I would just encourage all institutions not to wait. Reciprocity is moving forward, but there is going to be an overlap in time where you won't be authorized in every state, even once your state joins SARA, as Russ mentioned. So I think that becoming informed and becoming compliant with every state, or at least attempting to do so, would be advisable.
Great, and with that, I want to thank Marshall and thank Rhonda for this. Again, we'll look at there's some questions that we did not get to. There was a lot of issues around fees that we didn't get to in that, and several other things that we'll look at, and we'll get that information out to everyone. I want to let people know about WCET's State Authorization Network. This is a separate service that we run, and that we will be starting up a new program year for that beginning April 1st, so watch for the statement of work coming out about that. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Megan and have her wrap it up for us.
Thank you, Russ. I just want to say that we had several new friends here today, so if you want to learn more about WCET, please visit us online at wcet.wiche.edu. There you can learn about becoming a member and seeing our member benefits. Save the date for our 26th annual meeting in Portland, Oregon, November 19 through 21, and we'll be sending out the call for proposals next month. Join us for our next webcast on February 13th, which will include William Preston Davis, who presented Bringing a Campus Experience to Online Students at our last annual meeting, and it was very well received. Again, we will send out the link to the recording, any resources that are shared, and the final responses to questions that were not answered during the live webcast. We'll send those out at the latest by next Thursday. Final appreciation to Blackboard Collaborate and our WCET supporting members and sponsors. Thank you, everybody.